thanks to all of you that joined the three-part series, the third part of our three-part series, around how to automate compliance in the cloud. We conducted a series on CloudQuery and understanding deeply how to use it. Unfortunately, the demo gods were not looking out in my favor, so I wasn't able to complete the demo during the session. But as promised, here I am recording this demo to walk through some of the core concepts that we were going to cover during the webinar. So let's go ahead and hop in. I'm going to run CloudQuery on this Ubuntu box that we have pre-configured for Sec 557. So I'll quickly run just a osquery command to show you that this is a Ubuntu box. You can see the version, and you can see some of the basic OS data that we can get just from osquery. Now, we are running CloudQuery as an extension of osquery here, and we're running all of our statements and commands here in this interpreter. So you can see here that I typed in osquery and it popped me into this interpreter. So before we get into some statements and tables, let's look at a few useful commands to know from an osquery and CloudQuery perspective. .help is going to be really useful for you because it's going to list all of these different commands that the prominent shell commands that you should be aware of. .exit or .quit, so this one .quit or .exit is going to get you out of the interpreter. So if I hit .exit, let's clear the screen and type back in osquery, and now we're back in. .mode is an important one to know, so let me hit .help again. .mode is going to be how are the results displayed. So currently they're displayed in a pretty format. What does that mean? So if I do a select, and we'll get into some of these select statements and things like that, star from the AWS IAM user table, you're going to see in this nice relational database kind of format where we're going to see the count of the number of users in this respective AWS account. Now, if I change that mode, so up here we see .mode and we have this other option line or list or whatever it may be, and let's say I change it to .mode line, and I run that same command, now you're going to see it on a line. Or maybe we do .mode lists, and I run that same command, and now you're going to see it on the list by list. So there's different ways that you can visualize this data. We're going to go back to the default of pretty, so we can see it in this relational database format. Now, if you want to look through the tables and see what are some of the tables available to me. So if I do a .tables on AWS, take a look at all the tables that are available. And if you paid attention, if you were watching in the webcast that we did in this third part, the multi-cloud, multi-account approach to compliance, you probably noticed that there's some more additional buckets that we looked at on CloudQuery Hub than what's displayed here. And that's because it is an open source tool, so oftentimes those updates are made and you have to go out and fetch the newest and latest versions here. So we'll go ahead and do that before our next run of Sec 557. But you can see all of the AWS tables that are available here. Now, what if you want to see how a table was built? You remember when we were in the webinar, we looked at the schema of some of these tables. So let's take a look. You can run a .schema on a table, and it's going to tell you exactly how a table was created. So this create table command was used to create this IAM user table. We're going to find stuff like the account ID in here. We're going to find the create date. We're going to find the user ID and the username, some really valuable information. All right, so that's enough about those commands. If you do want a deeper dive into how to use osquery, how to use some of these commands, I'd highly recommend part 2 of this webcast series. So the cool thing about CloudQuery that we previously discussed are the CloudQuery policies that include a collection of queries that you can run on a scheduled basis across multiple accounts and cloud providers. Today, we're just going to focus on one account and one cloud provider so that we can dive into the details, but I highly encourage you to explore running these same queries in an automated manner on a scheduled basis, but also across multiple providers. So I'll run a few checks here to show the power of CloudQuery, and I'll explain the syntax, but to get a deeper dive, again, part 2 is where you want to look into. So if I just want to examine the entire password table, so the first thing we're going to do is look at password policies, and we want to see what are the password policies set on this particular AWS account. And I'm going to run this select star from AWS IAM account, password policy, and you can see here I get a ton of results. Now, this is a little bit easy to dive into, and it's still kind of jumbled up here because it's of the format, but imagine if this was multiple accounts. Imagine if we had 10 or 15 accounts. That would be really difficult to get through and to read, right? So instead of having to do this is where the power of SQL comes into play, is we can go out and pull specific information. So let me go ahead and do a dot schema on this password policy table and see what are some of the things that we see here. And we're going to see a lot of things that we typically would see in our information security policy, right? Require numbers in your password, require lowercase characters, prevent password reuse, maximum password age, require uppercase characters, require symbols. So a lot of things that we are looking for that are going to really matter in a compliance assessment or when we're doing some compliance checks. Now, I mentioned the AWS CIS benchmarks during the webinar, and as you can see here that I'm about to go into, we're going to look at some of the AWS CIS benchmarks for the password policy. So the first password, CIS 1.5, says, let's ensure that the AWS IAM password policy requires at least one uppercase letter. So I'm going to get in and show you some of the power of SQL here. So remember, we can select specific pieces from this table. So I'm going to go ahead and get the account ID. I'm going to get the column require uppercase characters. And you're going to see here that I just did something. I hit enter. Now, the interpreter is not going to go ahead and run this line. It's going to allow me to keep typing, and that's because I didn't include that semicolon, which you probably saw me include up here. So as long as you don't include this semicolon, you can do a multi-line query, which is helpful if you're copying and pasting from the internet, or if you just want to have it a little bit more readable like I do here in this demo. So I'm going to select the account ID, the require uppercase characters column from this table, but I only want it where the require uppercase characters equals true. And then if I hit enter again, it's still not going to run. And then now that I hit this colon, and no matter how many times I hit enter, it's not going to, but I hit this semicolon, now it's going to run, and it's going to give me the results. But I did something wrong. I spelled uppercase wrong. So we're going to go ahead and run this back from, let's see, where, and we're going to spell characters right this time. We'll close this out right here. And we're going to get the results back that says, in this account, require uppercase characters true. Now what if you're like, okay, AJ, I have 100 accounts. I don't want to see 100 list of accounts that tell me when something is true. I want to know when it's false. I only want to know when things are going bad. So you can run the same query, and when you do where, put false here. And what this is going to tell the interpreter to do is only return result where this check is false. So it's not going to return anything because the only account displayed here does have this setting in place. Now let's take a look at a few other AWS CIS benchmarks. I'm going to comment this out so that we can see what we're running. So you can see here this one, AWS CIS, ensure IAM password policy requires at least one lowercase letter. So again, I'm going to just go back and run our same query again, but I'm going to change uppercase to lowercase. Select the account ID, the required lowercase characters. I'm going to select it from the AWS IAM account password policy table. I'm going to select it where lowercase characters equals false. And you see we have no results, which means this account is good to go here. Let's do one more because this isn't, the where clause doesn't just allow you to only do text. You can do beyond text. You can go ahead and do integers and say, okay, CIS 1.9 benchmark says we have to have a minimum password length of 14 or greater. So let's go ahead and run that same query. So we're going to select the account ID, but instead of this, I'm going to select minimum password length from this table. Where the minimum password length is greater than 14. So as you can see here, I have a query that I can do a greater than operator to get me some results. So let's take a look here at the results, and it looks like I have in this account the minimum password length requirement is 20. So you can do this with whatever your information security policy requirements are. Now there's a couple other CIS benchmarks as it relates to passwords around reuse and expiration. We're not going to get into those because I want to maximize the time that we have here. But I did want to show that where clause and the power of it as you start to carve out and create some of your queries. So on AWS, S3 bucket security is obviously very important, and you should definitely include these checks in your cloud queries. So let's first check our public access settings, because we know that's critical because there's a lot of breaches that have to do with S3 buckets, and we want to get that information. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let me get that account ID. And again, actually, you know what? We'll leave account ID out, but that would be very useful to include when you're doing multi-account checks. But since this is only going to be in one account, for the ease of view, I want to get the public access block config from this AWS S3 bucket table. And you know what? I'm going to show you this limit command. I'm going to limit the results to just 2, actually just to 1, so we can really dive into the details here. So we're going to get the S3 bucket name, and we're going to get the configurations of their public access block configurations. It's going to take a little second to go out and get this information, but we should see the results here in a second. All right, so it looks like this Sec 557 audit reports demo bucket does have the public access block configuration settings in place. So that's exactly what we would want to see. And you can check this across all of your buckets in multiple accounts. So you're starting to see some of the power of CloudQuery. Another common check has to do with security groups. And we often want to see, are there any security groups allowing unrestricted access over port 22? Or allowing anyone in the world to SSH to your EC2 instances. So let's get a little fancy here to understand how we can get this type of information. So again, let's select. I'm not gonna do the account ID. I'm gonna get, actually, let me just verify something real quick on this table. So EC2 security group, and the .schema is your friend, because again, I'm about to write a query and I want to check to see what's some of the information I want. So I'm going to skip account ID since this is only one account. I'm going to get the region code. I want to know what region this security group is in. I don't really care about this information because I know my organization doesn't do a great job there. Now tags, if we were using tags, I would really want to use tags here to limit the data that I get, but we're not going to use tags here. But this is what I want. I want those IP permissions. So I'm going to do select the region code, those IP permissions from, let me do this on another line, AWS EC2 security group table. And this is where we're going to get a little fancy. So we're going to do this where clause again, where IP permissions, instead of an exact like we did before, an equal or a greater than operator, we're going to use this like clause, which is going to allow us to have a little bit of a wild card here, where we're going to be able to say we only want results that are like this. And you can do strings, you can do other things, and I know that the results of the EC2 security group table displays the open ports in this format. So I'm just going to cheat a little bit here based off of what I know, but you always can run these and pull out the information that you need. What's important here is understanding this right here. That little % sign is the wildcard sign in SQL. So this tells me, give me the IP permissions column where it starts like this, and I don't really care what comes after that, and that's what this wildcard means. So I'm going to go ahead and end that out and close it off, and let's see what results we get here. So what we should see are any of the security groups that are allowing IP permissions to port 22, to allowing people to SSH to a particular EC2 instance. And it looks like we do have one result. Now, what if I wanted to just say, all right, AJ, that sounds good, but I really just want to get a total count before I dive into the details. I want to always make sure that this isn't a thing that is going to happen in my environment regularly. So instead, I can just get a total count of this. I want to count from this table where IP permissions are like this and see what results we get. Hopefully we only get one result back because we only see one here, and that will tell us that this is working right. But this is another thing that you can do. This count right here is really powerful from a compliance and measurement perspective. If you're just trying to get some numbers and a quick understanding of what's going on, this count is going to be very, very useful. All right, lastly, let's check CloudTrail as our last one. I hope that this is sparking some curiosity about how you can go out and get some information from your cloud providers, and you're excited to go out and try this. So I'm going to explore the CloudTrail table. We're going to say, I want to know the account ID. I want to know, is it a multi-region trail? I want to know, is it an organization trail? And go ahead and tell me what region it is in. And then we're going to get that data from the AWS CloudTrail table. And what did I do wrong? Oh, I forgot the is in front of multi-region trail. Try that again. All right, this should go out and give me some good information about CloudTrail, which is a very important service on AWS. It's also a CIS benchmark, so you kind of see the theme here, and we do this in Sec 557 as well, where we're going to teach you how to do a lot of checks according to CIS benchmarks. So you can see here we have a trail in all of these different regions. They're multi-region trails, but they're not organizational trails, and that's something that we'd probably want to dive into from a security and compliance perspective. So I hope this was helpful. I'm really glad I was able to record this demo. Unfortunately, wasn't able to do it during the webinar. But again, hope this was useful and look forward to seeing you all in Sec 557. Thank you.